in New World, when you die in a PvP match, you don't lose anything. And this means that you can PvP as often as you want. You can try as many times as you want to get better. RuneScape is interesting. If you die in RuneScape, whether it's at a hard boss or in a PvP situation, you actually lose stuff, which means you can't jump straight back into that experience as you were 5 minutes ago or before you died. You will now be slightly weaker. You'll be slightly poorer. And this is one of the biggest problems with PvPing in any MMORPG. It's not possible to go back into the exact situation you were in and try again. You're now in a slightly weaker situation. Someone just said, being a noob is part of the fun in things like fighting games. If you and me were to play Tekken or Dead or Alive or something like that, as soon as I lose and I start a new game, it's exactly the same, and I can get better. Yeah. And I can improve because I know the baseline that I'm starting from is only ever going to get better. PvP and MMORPGs where you actually lose something means every time you try again, you're actually starting from a slightly weaker position, whether it's money-wise or equipment-wise or kind of net wealth-wise. Look at PvP in games where you don't lose anything, such as Guild Wars 2. People can jump in and they enjoy it and they enjoy the experience. But the irony of that is a lot of people in RuneScape only want to PvP because the other person can lose something.
That's the thing, isn't it? You need a value proposition to everything in the game. And RuneScape's value proposition for PvP is you get what they had. And it's for both players, it's big risk, big reward. It's not something I can see them easily fixing by just trying to switch up the way that you do it. They need to add that value proposition.
Someone has said, hey, people should drop their entire bank when they die. There actually was a RuneScape thing where that happened for a bit. Every time you killed another player, you got a key.
Deadman mode.
Yeah, and when you got the key, you could go to their bank, look at their bank, and destroy something from their bank. So there have been temporary game modes they've put into RuneScape where you can destroy people's progress. Now, some people in the chat, and a lot of people say to me, oh, I love it when it's hardcore and everyone dies and you lose all your stuff. Okay, that's fine. Clearly, not enough people love it to sustain a game. Because we've seen a lot of games. And this is what I think people don't understand. This gets me so much. I get very irritated with this. Extremely well-geared player. Fighting extremely well-geared player. With full loot on death. Everything gets, everything gets killed. Like Mortal Online. Person dies. Winner gets all the stuff. Loser now has nothing. They have to make a choice. Work back up to where they were. Or just quit. Now, these kind of hardcore games can work if working back up to where you were is easy. And it's not too time. Imagine if you had to spend a month grinding for every single armor set and every weapon before you went out to battle. And if you lost, you had to do it all over again. Some people would love that. But not enough people would love that to sustain a hardcore player base in most MMORPGs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Deadman mode was a bit flawed because of what you say, but I think it works in RuneScape in both old school and RuneScape 3 because you only take into the wilderness what you can afford to lose, right? And you keep gear so you can build back up that set and go back out and fight.
It's why everyone goes with just Green Dragonhide and Rune Crossbow. They are exceptionally powerful for what they are. But look at games like Eve. If you were to lose a ship worth thousands of pounds in Eve, it's not like you can go... Yeah, you can't just go, oh, that was a good PvP experience. I'm going to go and have the same PvP experience again and get better at it. You can't go and get better at it because you can't go and try it again. And that's one of the big sticking issues with PvP. If you can just try it again immediately, then there's no value in beating someone as far as actual gaining items and gold goes. But if you can't just try it again immediately, a hell of a lot of people won't do it. If you want PvP to be fun, you need to look at giving them the experience of PvP itself being fun, not necessarily the rewards for it. Look at, I hate to use the example, but look at Fortnite. Why do people play Fortnite? Is it because every single time you kill someone, the opponent gets worse? No, it's because they can keep trying again and again and again. Battle Royale games do this very, very well. Can we make the process of fighting another player itself fun without needing to give the winner a monetary reward?
It depends on the type of game. With RuneScape, I'd say it's pretty fundamental to it. Like, when you think of RuneScape PvP, you think of the good old days in the wilderness. Even if you were on the receiving end of the battering, you fondly remember that being PvP. And I think if Jagex tried to transition away from this full loop PvP to anything else, it's not going to cut it.
I think what tends to happen is the people that want these long grinds between PvP sessions, these long build your armor up, build your weapon up, lose everything, build it up again, the people that really want that often seem to be people with a lot of free time. People that can afford, even if you have a full-time job, if you come home and you put 6 hours every day into your favourite MMORPG, you know, you go to work for 8 hours, you come home, you game for 8 hours, you wake up. That's your only hobby. That's all you do. These people would probably love that, because to them, re-gearing is probably a 2 or 3 day thing. But to the player that's putting an hour or two into it a night, if that, re-gearing for them is a week-long or a month-long thing. It's a lot of free time. People even say to me, oh, if you can't put, you know, hours and hours and hours every day into this, you shouldn't be playing it. It's not for you.
That's kind of what I was going to say to a certain extent, because you need to remember that you can't make a game for everybody. And if you do, it's going to be a pretty shit game.
Definitely. But if that's the case, maybe what we're seeing is we're actually seeing a divide between the hardcore players who will put a lot of time into it, being the incredibly talented PvPers, and the new players who can put an hour or two a night who aren't talented, being the people going into the wilderness. And you effectively have two demographics of players, the hardcore, lots of free time skilled, fighting the much more casual. And that, I think, is the wilderness's biggest weakness. Yes, it is a Wild West, but just like the Wild West, it will be ruled by people with the most free time, the most money, the most power. You're not going to get enough people to rebel against them. If people say, oh, you know, you've got to have this hardcore mentality of putting hours and hours and hours into it, and they want a hardcore game experience, that's fine, but you have to understand you're only going to be playing against people who also want a hardcore game experience. Mortal Online 2 is a good example.
I think with RuneScape, though, I think it's fair to say that RuneScape is very time investment oriented. Across everything, skills, and I think it would feel weird to say that the time is the issue in the case of RuneScape. I would say the learning curve is the difficulty. And in fact, Jagex Goblin has joined the chat and said, we'll say that LMS, Last Man Standing, and the PvP Arena do provide avenues for people to get stuck into practicing and improving in PvP with a look to engage in high-risk wilderness PvP without losing items while learning. And I do agree. However, I've noticed that a lot of the already good PvPers are out in the wilderness making bank, right? Because they're good at it. So the people who are training to PvP in the PvP arena and in the LMS generally are up against other people that are trying to learn. So you're not actually learning against the caliber of player that you aim to be against. You're just fighting other people that are learning too. And there's only so far you can learn in that kind of bracket of players. Then you're going to have a very harsh reality when you go into the wilderness. And I know people who've done this. They're dominating LMS, right? They're winning 8 out of 10 games, and then they go into the wilderness and just get their cheeks clapped.
It's almost like I used to learn to play Red Alert or StarCraft or Unreal Tournament by playing against bots. And eventually, after beating the hard bots on Red Alert, I thought, ooh, I'm pretty good at Red Alert. I'm going to take on some human opponents.
And then you realise,
absolutely wiped the floor with me. Like, by the time I'd got like 4 or 5 guys and a tank ready to explore, they'd got the Third Reich marching down on me. I'm like, how have you done this? How have you managed to get this many tanks and helicopters? How are you this much better than the bots? And I realised that was the problem. So what then happened was, and that was a Red Alert specific joke, by the way, guys, so it does make sense. What then happened was, when you're training in the duel arena, in the PvP arena, you're not training against unfair fights. You're not training against clans. You're not training against people tricking you and trapping you. You can get better at switching and stuff, but it's a much, much different experience when you actually go and do it. And you end up with, I think this is what the core element is. Casual players want to PvP without losing progress.
Yeah.
Hardcore players want to PvP knowing there is a major loss for them or their opponent based on who wins. And you're putting them both against each other. When people say, hey, how do we revive the wilderness? What they're saying is, we've got too many hardcore players in the wilderness and not enough casual players for them to kill. How do we entice the casual players into the wilderness to be killed? Because if the casual players wanted to be in the wilderness, they'd already be there.
Yeah, that's true. And this is why I think more things like the Wilderness Altar could really help with this. Because if you look at a lot of the fights that are taking place, it's a load of PvPers going there to hunt the noobs and to stop, get their bones off them and whatever. They often end up just fighting each other. And then you've got PvPers against PvPers. And they kind of just forget about the little krill at the bottom of the pond. They're caring about the big fish now. I think that could go a long way to helping it. It wouldn't be the only fix by any stretch. It wouldn't be. There needs to be more exclusive content in the wilderness. It needs to be compelling enough to make people want to go and do it.
I'm going to say a really controversial thing here that people will dislike me for, and I know that people will give me examples from World of Warcraft they loved. I don't think traditional MMORPG games are that good at doing PvP. And I know that people will say, oh, but I had a great time at PvP. I think games that are designed around player versus player, and again, I hate the example, but Fortnite. I think Fortnite does PvP fantastically. Apex Legends does great PvP. Mortal Kombat is amazing at PvP. Red Alert, fantastic. Unreal Tournament, fantastic. Games that are designed to facilitate player versus player to the best of their ability, amazing.
Yeah.
MMORPGs are designed for you to take a character on a long-term progressive journey as you get more powerful. When you put player versus player into a game that is mostly about personal progression, it's almost impossible to balance, because if you force the player to a certain level, like Guild Wars 2 does, then your progression within the game is irrelevant to PvP, and if you don't force it, PvP is always inherently unbalanced. People have said, hey, why don't you just add rewards for dying in the wilderness? Okay. People will then abuse it and just go and die repeatedly to do it. The more you add, and this is another big one, if you add rewards for doing the process beyond enjoying the process itself on a personal level, then people will do that process to get the reward, regardless of whether they like it or not. If you're trying to renew the wilderness by just putting rewards at the end of various processes, you're not necessarily renewing the wilderness, because people's reason for going there isn't, I enjoy the gameplay of the wilderness. It's, I want this reward in spite of the gameplay of the wilderness.
Yeah. And that's a tough thing to balance, because I think that leads back to the people saying, oh, well, I don't PvP, but I want a dragon pickaxe. And unfortunately, I think there is a point where the developers have to draw the line and say, tough shit, if you don't want to go and do the content, you don't get the reward. Because otherwise you're devaluating the content that you put that there to give value to. And if you don't get, if you are someone who is adamant that you are never going to go in the wilderness and you're never going to get a dragon pickaxe, well, unfortunate, but that's the price you pay for not doing the thing to get the reward.
The question then is, should the reward that you get be related to the thing that you're doing to get it? So, for example, the dragon pickaxe is a mining pickaxe. You are not going into the wilderness to mine. If you want to go into the wilderness and kill a boss and then fight a player to get something that helps you mine, I do understand that it's this lovely spider web of mixing things together. But it would be as if you have to go and do a mining mini game in order to get the best player killing weapon. If people want to mine, let them mine. If people want to woodcut, let them woodcut. If you want to say to someone, hey, if you want to be the best miner in the game, you've got to go and do fishing, that sounds a bit weird. If you
you've hit the nail on the head there. And something that I would suggest for that is keep the pickaxe in the wilderness, add a new ore that spawns sporadically round the deeper parts of the wilderness, and some in the less deep parts. Have it be stackable. have it that after mining 10,000, you can trade it in to a vendor in Edgeville. Now, it's a risk and reward thing. Do you stay out long enough to get big stacks of it so you only have to bank once every then and again? Or do you bank frequently, but it takes longer because you're doing more bank trips? And the items cannot be traded on the Grand Exchange, but they can be obtained in PvP.
I think
you can PK the stuff off them, and get that value. Goblin says, I will say in case it adds anything to the conversation, we've spoken on Q&As before that we plan to add alternative sources for the D-pick, given the sentiment surrounding its importance as a progression item in the wider game. And while I understand that they want to add more sources to get the thing, here's what you need to realistically look at. If I give you the option, Josh, to go into a very dangerous, deep, wildy thing where you can risk a lot of money to get a pickaxe, or you could go elsewhere and get it safely, what are you going to do?
I am the kind of guy that will go for getting it safely over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that do enjoy PvP will still go and do it the safe way, because
I mean, it
has
gambling.
to be exclusive.
I don't like gambling with my time.
No.
I don't necessarily like knowing that my progress can be taken away from me. So when I am making a decision, I will often go with the slower progress that is guaranteed to stack than the risky progress that is potentially going to be a lot quicker. But that's just me. That's just the way that I like doing things. I would rather do something slow and know I'm going to get to a guaranteed reward than rush and risk getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, they say he who dares wins. They say no risk, no reward. And there are people who have achieved a great deal of stuff by risking it and running forward. People like that kind of risk, and I'm not saying it should be taken away from them. I'm saying that you should be able to achieve a mechanically similar reward based on whichever direction you take, but then it should be visually different, because that is one of the best ways to differentiate what people have done.
I think that's actually a really good point. That maybe you can get like take the dragon pickaxe completely away from the wildy bosses, but give a wilderness ornament kit.
Yeah.
For the dragon pickaxe as a drop. That makes more sense.
Sweet, there we go. Make it potentially even non-tradable if you wanted to. That way you have to go and
make
get
it non-tradable. Yeah.
This is an interesting... I mean, Final Fantasy XIV does that in some aspects. That's one of the really interesting ways. Do you think surprise reward is better, or reward that you will definitely get by finishing something specific? Perion, good question. So, I think both have a really good place at driving people to do content. And this goes back to Neverwinter. I freaking love Neverwinter. Old Neverwinter, not new Neverwinter. Old Neverwinter had a really cool way of doing dungeons. So when an armor set came out, you would have the helmet, the body, the legs, the boots, the gloves, the weapon, that kind of stuff. Yep. But every piece of this armor was in a different dungeon. So you didn't just have one person doing one dungeon repeated to get the whole thing. You would do dungeon A until you got the helmet, and then dungeon B until you got the gloves.
WoW raids.
Yeah, and I love that kind of stuff, because it meant that every single dungeon was always busy, because there were always people trying to grab stuff. But if you completed the dungeon and didn't get the item, you would then get seals. Seals of the Drake, seals of the Lion, seals of the Dragon, seals
this will be
something.
where this will be where WoW got this from, because they do the same thing with like Valor tokens.
You go to the seal vendor and you buy a piece of armor or a weapon or an item, and normally it's the same stats, but it looks different. Which means you are still making progress slowly toward the thing you want, but you might get lucky and be rewarded by getting it early.